Okay, we'd like to start our presentation today by acknowledging that we are presenting from the traditional lands of Australia's First Nations. Linda is located in Geelong on the traditional lands of the Wadawurrung people. And Julie, that's me. I'm located in Warrnambool on the traditional lands of the Peek-Wurrung people. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise that traditions of teaching, research and innovation have taken place in this country for over 65,000 years of continuous culture and care for the land and waterways. So my name's Julianne Lynch, and I'm an Associate Professor at the School of Education at Deakin University. And I'm presenting today with my colleague, Associate Professor Linda Hobbs. Thank you for inviting us to be part of the conference. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to join you remotely from our locations in Australia. Our presentation today is focusing on teachers because we believe and research shows us that teachers' work is critical to educational transformation in schools. But it also shows us that rural teachers are often not enabled in this transformational work. A key and persistent factor that impacts teachers' capacities for transforming education in Australia and internationally is out-of-field teaching. So we're going to focus on that phenomenon and use a theoretical framework for identifying some avenues for strengthening rural out-of-field teachers' agency for transforming education in schools. So I'm going to start by providing a bit of context for rural education in Australia, where we have a very large landmass with a relatively small population, and most of that population is close to the coast, and a large proportion, 72% of the population, is found in the major cities. In Australia, we've got almost 11,000 schools, and 47% of those schools are in non-metropolitan areas. And if you think through the maths of that, it means that there are a lot of small schools in quite remote areas. Because of the size of the country, we have very diverse geographical contexts, diverse climate, and diverse conditions. I'm going to use the word rural to refer to all schools that are not in those major cities. So with this geography and the social geography that goes along with that, we see a very complex intersection of geography, population and culture. In rural schools, we are more likely to see high levels of family poverty and underemployment compared with their metropolitan counterparts. We see reduced access to infrastructure and services, particularly to technological, internet and telephony. And we also have very serious supply issues in terms of teacher staffing, where it is difficult to staff schools in rural settings, and there is often a high level of staff turnover where new staff are recruited but do not stay for very long. Parallel with these material and actual disadvantages, there's also a strong city-centric discourse that accompanies sort of public conversation and sort of public discourse about rural schools in Australia, stereotypical views about what it's like to be rural and what the conditions might be in rural schools. Research identifies opportunities and I guess the strengths of rural schools. Strong connections to the land and strong connections to place. Strong sense of community and collaboration, particularly in the face of challenges. And also, although schools are subject often to turnover of staff, there are also intergenerational commitments to schools, where parents and families and grandparents often attended the same school as their children, and some of the staff members in those schools actually do have long connections with the schools and with the communities. Those connections and those sort of investments bring high levels of motivation and also local knowledge that can support innovation in rural education.
So thinking about teaching out of field then, so what is it and why do we have it and why is it of interest and a concern, particularly in rural and regional areas? Out of field teaching usually arises for a number of reasons. The first is teacher shortage, a shortage of certain teachers within the system. It might be unequal distribution of teachers, which can actually lead to an oversupply in some areas and an undersupply of teachers in others. And we've got this thing called hard to staff schools, which can occur in both metropolitan and rural areas. There's teacher shortages all around the world at the moment, but particularly in Australia, the reasons for that can be the low status of the teaching profession, but also a misrepresentation of what the job entails through media, particularly in this era of international comparative tests. There's also definitely an underrepresentation of cultural diversity in our teacher workforce. And this is a bit surprising given that we are such a multicultural society. So yes, poor teacher retention can contribute to the teacher shortage. We have an aging workforce as well. There is a lot of teacher mobility between schools, which can be a little bit difficult for schools to manage. Ultimately, what happens is that a school is funded for a certain number of teachers, and getting the right mix is really very difficult. The right mix to accommodate the subjects that a school needs to provide. It can be difficult to have a specialist in all of the different subjects. So that's how out-of-field teaching arises. But what actually is it? So very generally speaking, teaching out of field refers to those teachers who are teaching subjects that don't have a background in the discipline, either as a major or a minor, or they don't have relevant teaching methods which they would complete during their teacher education. Also recognised is out of phase, which means teachers who are teaching maybe at primary level when they're secondary trained, or secondary level when they're primary trained, or maybe they're qualified to teach up to for junior secondary in certain subjects, but they might be teaching in some senior subjects. So that means they're out of the phase of their preparation. We've also used the term out of context to represent teachers who are teaching in contexts that are not familiar to them. So they might have come from a metropolitan centre and they might be teaching in a rural area, and they may not appreciate the challenges and how you need to operate within those areas. Also, we talk about teaching out of field as being partially out of field. So most teachers, they will have some in-field subjects they're teaching in a day or across the week, and maybe some teaching out of field allocation. Often teachers are temporary in their roles. They might just be filling in for a very short period of time, or they may be teaching the subject long term. A science teacher might have taught maths for as long as they've taught science in their 20-year teaching degree, but they still see themselves as out of field because they don't have that qualification. So there is no single definition of what it means to be out of field, and that is because of the different policies for different education jurisdictions. So in order to understand the teaching out of field as a phenomenon, we need to recognise that other people who are within the education system who can really determine the effect of the experience for teachers and students. School leaders, for example, who may appreciate the challenges for teachers and provide necessary supports, and recognise the need for teachers to develop their expertise over time. So whether the teaching out of field is a negative experience for teachers and students depends on many factors. If it's poorly managed, there is research that shows that there's low academic performance of students when teachers are teaching out of field, and some of that data has come from America. Some research shows that teachers they become very stressed and it can lead to teachers leaving the profession, or it can add to the stresses that teachers experience. There is research that shows that when a teacher is not confident in what they're teaching, they can experience lack of confidence in their teaching generally. They can lack that sense of belonging because they may not have the support they need from teachers who are in field in the area that they're teaching out of field. There is some concern that there is some inequity associated with out of field because of the unequal distribution of out of field teaching, with the incidence of out of field teaching being higher in rural areas compared to metropolitan in many surveys. These images depict some of the metaphors that teachers referred to when they were asked about what metaphor represented them learning to teach out of field. So you've got Play-Doh on the left, or putty, which represents the malleability and the willingness to change that out-of-field teachers need to have when they have to learn new content or learn how to teach something new. You've got the idea of Tassie Devil and Little Miss Messy that are all a little bit crazy, with teachers feeling like they've got out of control, it's really busy, and they have a lot of things going on in their head, uncontrollable and difficult to manage. The cone means when you're at the top of your game, you've got more space, and that's particularly in your infield area, you know what you're doing. But when you're feeling disorganized, because you're in an out of field area, you're at the bottom of the cone and you're feeling squashed and you've got no room. The deflated football means unintended use. You can't actually use the football or the teacher for what they're intended for. With the hexagon, the teacher isn't able to roll quite as quickly as a circle. In a circle, they can think very quickly, able to move more naturally, whereas when you've got those edges, you're a bit stunted in the way you move. And with the roller coaster, that was representing that you just don't know when the drop's going to come. So it's unpredictable when you're teaching out of field. You might think you're going okay, but then something happens that you're not aware of and the drop comes quickly. And then the last one is the dimmer switch. The idea of it starts off dark, and when you walk into the room, the out-of-field teacher, you don't know where anything is, but over time, things get clearer and brighter, and you can see exactly what you should be aiming for. So what these metaphors represent is that learning to teach out of field is essentially a challenging process of establishing or re-establishing competence and confidence in the knowledge and teaching practices that a teacher has. They're quite compelling, as they do indicate the potential cost of teaching out of field on the individual in terms of their confidence, self-efficacy, and sense of self in relation to their role and others. But they can also help to signify key areas of growth. So growth in expertise, growth in confidence, growth in a general understanding of the layout of the land, for example. So what are some of the implications of the rural context for out-of-field teachers? To some extent, you could think about the teaching out of field as being the canary in the coal mine. It's basically a sign of the broader teacher shortage and issues that are facing the profession. You can see this in the difficulty to attract teachers to those hard to staff schools, but also you can see it in the way principals are making choices in their operational decision making. So, for example, we've found that principals can often use other criteria to select teachers for recruitment rather than their subject expertise. So whether teachers are likely to cope in that rural context, for example. Principals and school leaders often rely on creating cultures of support or innovation to resource and mentor out-of-field teachers. So recognising that teachers are always learning, and so if everybody's learning in the school, then it becomes normalised that a teacher who is out of field would also be learning and gain the support needed. Research also shows that teachers often accept that in these rural contexts, they need to be flexible and a jack of all trades due to being a small school and the limited teaching profile. Small schools in particular face the challenge of accessing in-field teachers for support because of the limited number of specialist areas, for example. So distance plays a huge factor in uptake of professional development in rural areas, but especially for out-of-field teachers, because research shows that they'll tend to choose their in-field area professional development over out-of-field areas. So we've also found a range of opportunities for expanded expertise and identities, but also teachers are recognising the extra career prospects. So having that variety of teaching experience that they may not get elsewhere, and so that they can see that as to assist with transition and mobility between schools and within their career. Now, those opportunities are only valuable if there is that support and opportunities for reflective practice.
The next part of our presentation is going to introduce a conceptual model that we're using to think about how out-of-field teacher agency might be strengthened so teachers are better able to enact transformative agendas in rural education. We have been inspired by Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, and we adapt 3 of his concepts to discuss the teacher's professional ecosystem with respect to strengthening out-of-field teacher agency. Bronfenbrenner's microsystem refers to those actors and systems with which they have direct interrelation. So those actors within your immediate setting. So in contrast, for the exosystem, it includes actors and settings that shape practice, but that they do so indirectly. The mesosystem includes those aspects of the microsystem that mediate interrelations with the exosystem. Considering teachers' professional ecosystem, we are proposing that the mediated relations with the exosystem suggest potential avenues for strengthening teachers' professional agency. This figure identifies the main actors and settings involved in teachers' professional ecosystems. Now, the extent to which these aspects of the teachers' ecosystems are part of their microsystem, in contrast, part of their exosystem, varies from teacher to teacher and from context to context, from school to school. So most often, the microsystem would include, for example, the teacher's students, the other teachers in the school, their school leadership, and what we have on this figure is their self, that is their own knowledge, beliefs, and professional aspirations. Now, for most practicing teachers, actors such as government authorities, the academy, and other industries and employers are part of the exosystem. So as part of their professional practice, they don't necessarily have direct interrelations with those actors. These aspects shape teachers' professional practice, but they're largely mediated, and usually a key sort of intermediary is school leadership and sort of the governance and policy structures at the school level and processes at the school level. These intermediaries that comprise the mesosystem can be enabling or disempowering.
The teacher to self interface mediates the extent to which teachers interact with the various settings that they're in. So at this interface, you've got teachers' sense of professional identity, confidence, and agency. The notion of out-of-fieldness recognises that while a teacher may be technically in-field, they might feel out of field, but also an out-of-field teacher might even feel in-field, and that and they might bring that into their sense of their self as a teacher. Experience can play a role in shifting a teacher from feeling out of field to actually feeling in field, given that they have developed those expertise over time. The commitment to The subject, the school, and the community are important, as are the motivation and capability of teachers, their willingness to engage with professional learning and further education as well. So how can rural out-of-field teachers be empowered within the teacher self-interface? Giving teachers access to professional learning and credentialing is really important where teachers feel motivated to do it. Also having an expectation both at the system and school level for that to occur means that teachers see that as part of learning to teach the various contexts that they teach in the school. A supportive, nurturing and enabling culture within the school setting is really important, especially in the small schools, as we've indicated. However, this can actually be challenged if there's high teacher turnover with teachers who don't stay for long periods of time, because that support is often based on relationships. Positive relationships are important to provide feedback, for professional affirmation, but also to support each other through capacity building, providing the resources, being part of a community of practice. Also, productive partnerships with the community and local industry can be really important in order to support a teacher to develop those expertise and experiences. The students play a critical role in giving feedback to the teacher in the consequences of their instruction.
Teachers' understandings of their students and their capacity to engage students in relevant and inspiring learning can be greatly enhanced through direct interactions with families and communities. This is really important in settings where strong deficit discourses fail to recognise community knowledge and expertise. Many regional families are not confident entering schools, and they're not confident communicating with school staff, particularly if parents and guardians themselves had difficult schooling experiences. And this means that students' families and communities are often part of the teacher's exosystem, with interactions with families and communities being mediated via interactions with students. And that's an important way that teachers can learn about families and communities. For out-of-field teachers, developing positive and collaborative involvement of their students, parents and guardians in their children's formal schooling can build confidence for the teacher and also new expertise as they experience learning to teach a new subject area. Furthermore, direct involvement of families and community members and community organisations in school learning can supplement teachers' subject knowledge by bringing in external sources of expertise and building relationships to support teaching and learning that integrates the teacher's in-field subject knowledge with their out-of-field subject knowledge through rich place-based learning experiences that can be developed when you make connections with communities and with the expertise that is held in families. Of course, other teachers are very important in terms of teachers' microsystems, where the teacher benefits from direct interactions with their colleagues in multiple ways. For example, sharing experiences and ideas, collaborating on planning and teaching and assessment, and providing emotional support when teaching work is difficult or distressing. Support from other teachers is critical for the success of out-of-field teachers, particularly support from in-field teachers or other teachers who have been teaching the subject for many years and have developed expertise and confidence in the subject. However, of course, in some rural schools, this type of support is not available, particularly in very small schools where there is often only one teacher allocated to a specialist area. Additionally, geographically isolated teachers might not have the benefit of contact with teachers from other schools and may find it difficult to access other professional networking opportunities. In these settings, the approaches of the school leadership, and the available resourcing to support teachers' connections with other teachers and their participation in professional networks beyond the immediate locality can be very impactful. Avenues for enhancing rural out-of-field teachers' access to other teachers include, for example, programs and resourcing that facilitate school-to-school professional networking, enabling rural teachers to participate in subject associations can provide access to peer support and to the expertise and resources of more agentic teachers, including in-field teachers. Another strategy is targeted peer mentoring, where out-of-field teachers can be mentored by an in-field teacher. And this can be facilitated online in many rural contexts. However, even this can be very difficult in settings that have limited internet access or a limited electricity supply. And that's often the case in very remote settings in Australia, including in remote Indigenous schools. For most in-service teachers, their interface with the academy and with education research is highly mediated. Indeed, the same is true for most school leaders. Disadvantaged schooling contexts, such as rural schools, are frequently impacted by the results and recommendations that influence government policy, including initiatives specifically targeting low-performing schools and schools in socio-educationally disadvantaged regions.
The teacher to academy interface deals with teachers having access to universities and other professional providers, including governments who can provide funding for those. Universities play a really important role in preparing teachers for the realities of the profession. Teacher educators often experience some tensions in doing this because policy dictates that they generally only have to prepare teachers for the areas that they have a major or a minor in. Also, an important part of this teacher academy interface is how teachers interact with education researchers. And what we have here is the range of outcomes of research that are reported in the latest UFTA's edited book. And teachers can share their experiences through participation in research and even conducting the research themselves. Teachers undertaking high degrees courses, being part of course advisory membership at universities, so to give feedback on courses so that the courses meet school needs, and also longitudinal connections with universities. So through that, both the universities and the schools really stand to benefit from those connections.
Education research also filters through to teachers via public media outlets and via edu-businesses and educational entrepreneurs. And some teachers interact with research via professional publications such as teacher journals and magazines. Of course, teachers generate and collect data for numerous purposes, especially for assessment of student learning. However, their more common interrelations with research processes, materials, and impacts rarely position teachers in agentic ways. More direct interactions with the academy can strengthen teachers' professional agency, and this is particularly important for out-of-field teachers who can benefit from understanding the out-of-field phenomenon, its impacts, and strategies for coping with and learning through their out-of-field teaching allocations. These types of interactions build teachers' capabilities to propose, advocate, and enact new practices in their schools to improve the educational outcomes of their students. Now, to conclude our presentation, the concept of professional ecosystems has helped us to think about teacher practice, the interrelations between settings involved in rural teachers' work, and avenues for educational transformation through professional learning and growth. Research identifies teacher agency as crucial for transformative education. For out-of-field teachers, professional agency is often compromised because their training has not prepared them for the teaching that they are assigned to. This situation is compounded in rural settings where the contexts can be more challenging and where access to support and resources is more difficult than for metropolitan teachers. So we've considered how out-of-field teachers might be empowered in their work through more direct interactions with those aspects of the professional ecosystem that are in their professional exosystem. For out-of-field teachers who often report low confidence including feeling like imposters in their own classrooms. Impetus and support within and collaborations between the microsystem and the exosystem is needed. This will enable and facilitate the types of interactions that we've outlined in this presentation. For those listening to us today, please feel encouraged to contact us if you would like to continue the conversation or if you have any questions.